Well, good morning and welcome to this formal meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Councillor Adam Stokes, Vice Chairman, is also present. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I would like to welcome members of the public watching this live. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we go further. I'd like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park and wait there. Can I remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting. Also, may I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live. Then press again when you finish your contribution. We will now move to the formal agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, replacement councillors. So over to you, Rachel, for that.
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Mrs Brockway, Councillor Mrs Sneath, Councillor Danny and Councillor King. We have Councillor Ray Wotton replacing Councillor Mrs Brockway and Councillor Linda Wotton replacing Councillor Mrs Sneath. These are both for this meeting only.
Okay, thank you. For a very warm welcome, or should I say hot welcome to both Councillor Linda Wotton and Councillor Ray Wotton, the committee they used to serve on a year or two back. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 2, declaration of councillors' interest. Do any members wish to declare any interest at this point? Okay, thank you. So agenda item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting and previous meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee, which was held on the 31st of May. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. I'll just go briefly through the pages, starting on page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and finally page 13. Do I have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Gray, thank you. Do I have a seconder? Sorry, Councillor Mrs Clark, thank you. We will now vote. You'll vote on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. All those in favour, please raise your hand. All noted? Thank you. Those against? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you. 3. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4 of the agenda is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. As Chairman, I have no announcements this morning. However, we have a heavy agenda today with one pre-decision scrutiny item in relation to the recommissioning of domestic abuse support services. I'd therefore like to remind officers that all reports presented today should be taken as read. Therefore, may I request presenters to only summarise key points of their reports submitted, and also may I remind members the importance of succinct questions and contributions that will allow for using the time allocated for each discussion effectively. It's fair to say it's a rather hot day today. Therefore, I invite you to make use of the water dispensers that are located in the rear of this room as often as required. Are there any Executive Council announcements? Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got rather an exciting announcement to make about Ermine Library, but with your permission, I'd like to invite Louise Egan to give the details of that, as it's officers who have done all the hard work. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, and you want to do that at this point? Sure.
Yes,
okay,
please.
So over to Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to announce that the Ermine Community Hub has reopened to members of the public as the library, and that is as of this morning. So we are finally able to acknowledge that the site has been able to operate again since the leaving of their former tenant. So I know that'll be great news to a lot of the communities over there.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Lee, you just want to come in there briefly?
Yep, I just wanted to say I'm very pleased to see that. I was in there myself about 2 weeks ago when the keys were handed over, and I know today's the official handover, and I intend to pop later. And I think officers have worked really hard, but I have to be honest, and I know people aren't going to like this, but I don't think anybody ought to be patting themselves on the back. This process started a year ago trying to get this reopened. So actually, it is an exciting and wonderful announcement, but actually, it should have happened a very, very long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Just staying on track, we've got Executive Council announcements. So, Councillor McNally, anything from you? Councillor Buttride, and I believe we've got Councillor Woolley online. Not indicating. Okay. Senior officers. Are there any announcements from senior officers, please? No? Shaking heads, so thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is the service level performance reporting against the performance framework 2021-2022, quarter 4. This item can be found on pages 15 to 54 of the agenda pack, and reports on the Tier 2 service level performance measures for 2021-2022, quarter 4, that are within the remit of this Scrutiny Committee. The actions are that this committee is invited to review and comment on the performance information contained in this report and highlight any recommendations or further actions for consideration. I'm going to assume that all members have read and digested the report, and I'm just going to ask for very brief presentations by the officers. The report will be presented by Martin Parker, who's the Assistant Director for Public Protection, who's in the chamber today. Will Mason, Head of Culture, also here. Lee Surdyfield, Assistant Director Corporate, who's with us. Mark Baxter, Chief Fire Officer. Steve Batchelor, Lincolnshire Road Safety Partnership Senior Manager, who's also in the chamber. I don't think I've missed anyone. To facilitate the discussion, we will take the questions following all the presentations. So you was the first one on the list, Martin, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with an apology, really based on the fact that you'll see on the paperwork that we're not able to report on the domestic abuse victims through Eden Links. So you'll see the figure stands at 1849. We haven't got any quarter 3 or quarter 4 data. I don't think that's acceptable. We should be able to report into the Scrutiny Committee exactly what Eden Links is reporting and who they are supporting. So what I've done is I've put a member of my performance team to utilise what the council are now doing with Power BI and our reporting system and eSINs, and trying to automate and assist Eden Links with that. The rationale from Eden Links is that they are the increase in numbers of referrals from agencies over the last 12 months has been unprecedented. That's been as a result of some of the pandemic issues, but also a change in processes within Lincolnshire Police that saw a sort of 600% increase in referrals that went through to Eden Links. We've managed that in terms of resources, but then to have that as a somebody then doing the admin in terms of the referrals and the support to provide the reports has caused issues with staffing. So we're hopefully going to be alleviating that requirement by utilising technology to actually automate the data from eSINs into Power BI so we can get a regular report. So I fully expect at the next time we sit as a committee that we'll be able to provide data in terms of our Eden Links outreach services and the support they do. We have got the outreach service data which has supported 615 victims within the quarter 3 data, and again we're behind on the quarter 4, but the similar concerns, the similar reasons are for that. In terms of our MARIC data, it's within expected levels. We have had an increase from 2020-2021 into the 2022 data, as you'll see from the figures, supporting 1,918 victims through the MARIC process. So they are all high-risk individuals who are assessed through a multi-agency panel in terms of support for them. And in the last quarter, 65 were repeat. So that's an individual who has appeared at a MARIC meeting on more than one occasion within the quarter 4. Therefore, that then provides more scrutiny from agencies. That ends my update really in terms of the Eden Links and MARIC update.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Similar for Will. Brief presentation, Will.
Thank you, Chairman. For the libraries, it continues to be the pattern that we've seen during and as we've gone through the recovery from COVID. So fairly safe to assume that we've now got a new pattern where people are attending libraries less often but taking out more books and items when they do attend. So we're finding that for Q4, again, the visits weren't what the target pre-COVID would have had them at. However, having looked at Q1 so far for this year, we are seeing that we're virtually back up to the normal set of issues that we would be expecting, particularly when taking into account recent closures at Stamford and Boston during building works. Better news, obviously, on visits to library websites. There's a little bit more information that I think Louise is going to summarise during the library report later, so I won't dwell on the positivities that we're seeing on kind of e-interactions in the library service. But overall, library website visits continue to be above target. And although the actual community use of libraries is down for the whole year, due to the fact that we hadn't fully opened due to COVID for that kind of use, for Q4 we were above target, so that is back to what we're expecting it again. In terms of heritage, obviously again we're still kind of coming out of the COVID effect, so whilst we've not got quite as many visits in person, the main hit there has been the work on the Links to the Past website. So we've not got the normal level of interactions on our website because Links to the Past, which is the access into the archive documents, that's quite a significant majority of those visits. However, we did launch on the 24th of March the new online catalogue, which received 14,000 visits in less than 3 weeks. So we're very confident that the new improved website will move forward in a very positive way. In terms of the measurement for how people have enjoyed their visits, the target of 85% was smashed, where 99.6% of people who visited our heritage sites felt that their experience was either good or very good. So we're actually going to increase the target for this forthcoming year on that one. That's all of my report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Will. Over to Lee.
So in terms of volunteering and the work with the VCS, very similar position to previous periods. Slightly down in terms of the number of voluntary organisations that have been engaged with. That's primarily due to the organisations gradually coming back online in response to COVID. A lot of them, as you know, closed. When we look at the number of organisations that are actually supported, many were supported multiple times. So the number of engagements are higher than the target, but the number of individual organisations is lower. When we look at the volunteers supported, nearly 1,600 were supported. Around about 1,000 of those were traditional volunteering. We also had around about 167 people accessing training, which continues to be strong. And we're seeing a slight growth in employer-supported volunteering opportunities as well coming through. At previous committees, we'd spoke about the number of volunteering opportunities. And if you remember, during COVID, particularly the number of volunteering opportunities was low. We now have over 350 opportunities that VCS and LCVS are reporting back to us, which is a positive position. But I think that builds upon the previous reports you've had in terms of their role now in trying to support individuals through into appropriate opportunities. But overall, a positive position.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Mark?
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. If it's okay, I'm going to hand over to Ryan Stacey, who's been pulling the report together for us.
Sure,
Thank you.
fine.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to labour through the whole report. We're achieving across all of our measures. The one area we're not achieving is deliberate secondary fires. So this is largely down to an increase in refuse and bin fires. And also we've got an issue that we're working with partners over at Summergangs Lane in Gainsborough, where we've seen an increase in fires. To put it into context, this year we've had 261 deliberate secondary fires compared to 224 last year. If we put it back to a pre-COVID year when there was not the impact of lockdowns, we see an increase from 256 to 261, so the increase is not significant compared to 2 years ago. However, it is something we are working quite closely with partners, particularly around the Summergangs Lane and around fly tipping, as well as another area we're working with local authorities.
Okay, Steve.
Good morning, thank you. I'm going to report that the number of people killed and seriously injured in Q4 of 2021 reduced to 132. For comparison, it was 138 the year before and 141 in 2019, so that's positive. Unfortunately, we did see an increase in the number of serious injuries in the 0 to 15 category. I think the most obvious explanation is as various lockdown restrictions and changes in how people were using the roads occurred throughout 2020 and 2021, that meant that there was more children out and about, and so there was a few more injuries. I'm pleased to note that there were no fatalities in either 2020 or 21 in that age group, although we have had one as a passenger in 2022 so far. We're working at the Road Safety Partnership to try and dig down into the data a little bit more and see if there's anything we can do over and above the work that we're currently doing in both primary and secondary schools to try and ensure that we target that going forwards. I think that's it for now.
Okay, thank you all for those presentations. I'd now like to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Ray Wotton.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Chairman. I'd like to comment on domestic abuse on page 17. In some ways, I was pleased to see that the numbers of reports are increasing because it gives confidence to victims to report these offences to either us or the police. Where I used to work in the Luton Domestic Violence Unit, 6% of our victims were men. I want to know, in Lincolnshire, are there a high proportion of foreign nationals who are subject to domestic abuse? Thank you.
Just looking around to see who supports me, or if there's anybody online. I don't have access to that those figures directly, but I can get them for you. I know we do have a lower percentage than we would expect for our demographics in terms of reporting. It is something that we are looking to resolve with when we come on to discussing the recommissioning of the service later, which is about an engagement and outreach service. So actually we can get into the hard to reach communities, so we can be more proportionate of our communities and make sure we are highlighting any hidden crime that may be taking place. But if you need the specifics, I can get those for you.
Yes, Chairman, that's when we found we had problems with the foreign nationals in Luton who wanted to keep their community close to themselves and very reluctant to report these offences here. So I would encourage us in Lincolnshire, if we've got these foreign nationals here, to engage with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. As you might expect, my comment is with regard to community libraries. I'd like it to be noted for the record, please, in the minutes, that as the representative for Ermine and Cathedral, I feel that the County Council's performance with regard to Ermine Library Hub has been unacceptably poor. I've got an email dated the 22nd of July last year to say that discussions had started with Bishop Grosseteste. So it's the 19th of July. That's a year. And I was assured right through the tail end of last year and the beginning of this year that it was building work that was holding it up, and everything, all the legal niceties were going alongside that, so it would all dovetail together at the end. But then we got to May, and there were things going wrong with the legal process and details to be addressed. So we've now waited a further 2 months. And on behalf of the people I represent, I just think that's absolutely unacceptable. And whilst I wish everybody the best going forward, and it's going to be a wonderful facility, this has been absolutely poor and wrong, and we should have done so much better for the people that I represent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you. Yes, we note Councillor Lee's comment, but you won't be surprised, Chairman, to hear me reject those. And please don't laugh. To say in public that the performance of our officers is unacceptable, I will not countenance that. Absolutely not. There are things, and I'm sure my colleague, Councillor Bottroyd, because it's been property as well that has been working so hard. There are things that have happened beyond the control of officers in this council. So I won't accept that statement made about my officers, especially in public. Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to come back on that.
Okay.
My comment is
it's
not...
a hot day without getting too heated.
Yeah,
but
my
carry
comment
on,
is
yeah.
not aimed at officers. The whole point is we're sitting on reserves and we are understaffed and under-resourced. That is where the problem lies. So no, the fault is not the fault of the officers. I've had lots of emails with Louise and Will. I've got no problem with their performance, but it is still unacceptably poor. And the people that I represent have had no access to a library or any kind of mobile library because it's been shut for almost 2.5 years. And that is wrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lee. Okay, no one else wish to comment on that? Councillor Buttride, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to come in. Obviously, I support Councillor Corey's comments. There are lessons to be learned. I think we can take that away. I've said that in this chamber before. But to say that it's solely the county council's fault, I think is not totally true. Obviously, there's two sides to this deal, and we've obviously worked hard from a legal point of view to push this through, but there are obviously things that are outside of our control, and time frames slipped, and you know, that's not all down to the county council. I just wanted to put that on record as well.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on if we can. So, Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say something positive, really, about the trading standards. I go to a weekly market, and recently I saw a trading standards officer with a member of the police going around the market checking all the goods. And it's really referring to page 17, I suppose. Sorry, not 17, it was further on. The bit about counterfeit goods being removed from the market. And I did notice the following week there were quite a few stalls missing from this market, but then over the following weeks after that, one or two have crept back again. So I was just really wanting to sort of say well done for being so visible in cracking down on this. It's a real problem, but hopefully follow-up visits can be arranged to sort of make sure that the effect's long-lasting. But it was really good to see. They were working really well together, and it made a real difference. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you very much, Chair. Regarding the domestic abuse figures, are you able to split it between adult and children, or is it just a cumulative figure that you come up with?
It's the cumulative figure that we report on here, but if you wish it breaking down in the future, we can do that. We have a
I think it would help us understand, as it were, where the problem lies, and whether we need to, as a committee, look at suggesting increases in assistance to target one or of those groups, because obviously any abuse is wrong, but particularly, for me, personally, children are the target. Thank you.
Yeah, so under the Domestic Abuse Act, it did officially change children who are caught up in domestic abuse situations as victims in their own right. So prior to that, Eden Links as a service was only looking at how they support adults, but we do have a children and young person worker within that setup that does support children, but obviously through also our children's services support as well. So it is slightly combined. So Eden Links is mainly targeted toward adults because that's the domestic abuse. That's what domestic abuse definition says, 16 and above. But we've recognised, and the DA bill's recognised, that children are affected, and we all know that they are affected in being families within domestic abuse. So we have got specific children and young people within that, and you'll see also in terms of the commissioning for the future outreach services that there is a focus on children and young people as well.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Raywotton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Steve Batcher a question on road safety, particularly on the average speed cameras on the A52 and the A1. Steve, are those cameras successful in reducing the number of accidents on that particular stretch of road? And if they are we thinking of introducing them on other roads? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Average speed cameras, in my opinion, are probably the most successful casualty reduction tool we have where there's a history of speed-related collisions. I think there is a place for spot speed and mobile cameras. Mobile give us lots of flexibility and allow us to go to areas of concern for the public. The spot speeds will have an impact where there's a cluster of collisions, but the average allows us to spread it over a kilometre and upwards. And generally speaking, we see two things: not only a reduction in the average speed of vehicles, but also less conflict, so less overtaking manoeuvres as people get frustrated, because I think there's just an acceptance that they're all going to travel through at a reasonable speed. So I think they are the best tool that we have. They consistently demonstrate reductions of in excess of 40% in the number of people killed and seriously injured where they've been installed year on year. We are introducing one on the A631 this year. We've been out to tender for that as well. We're currently considering the A16 at Burwell, and there's one other site that escapes me at the moment, but I can certainly provide that update afterwards. What we are then looking to do is we're looking at the final set of wet film fixed cameras that we have in place, and we're assessing each of those locations for digital upgrades and looking at whether average or spot speed would be the most appropriate way to deal with it.
Thank you, Chairman. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a very quick question on page 13.9 about overall enjoyment of services by visitor feedback forms. Would it be possible just to have a further breakdown? Really pleased to see this exceeding its target. That's fabulous. But I'm just wondering, would it be possible to have a bit further breakdown about each site, each visitor site, so that we know we can target where we may not be hitting the enjoyment level, if you know what I mean, because maybe some of our visitor sites need looking at and upgrading. Not being difficult. I just want to know if we can have a bit more detail. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Will?
Hi, yeah, one thing I can do, which I think will help put minds at rest, is that as well as doing our own visitor surveys, we pay very close attention to TripAdvisor, because TripAdvisor obviously is an incredibly important tool that the public use when deciding whether to visit places themselves or not. And what I can confirm is that all of our sites achieve the Excellence Award for TripAdvisor, and we all achieve the Visit England Quality Assurance Scheme as well, which is a national accreditation scheme. So I'm very pleased to be able to say all of our heritage sites absolutely knock it out of the park day in, day out.
Thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 26, delivery primary fires. For those individuals that you managed to catch who have caused these fires, have we got a profile that maybe we could use that in your efforts to try and educate people not to start fires? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. We do have a profile. We do use it in our arson reduction activities. It tends to be younger nuisance type fires in a lot of those occasions. We do work with our arson task force, and we work with prosecuting authorities such as the police to make sure that we can take account of the most appropriate action depending on the age range of these people and depending on the motivation that they have. A number of those fires are caused by fire setting behaviour which may not be appropriate to prosecute because it's curiosity led, and in those cases we work with those individuals to do arson reduction activities and work with them to understand the consequences of fire, right the way through to the range of adult deliberate fire setting which has a more nefarious cause. So we do work depending on the profile of those individuals. We work to reduce fires in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Can I come back on another question regarding general fires or bushfires? We've noticed in Europe the tremendous amount of damage being done at the moment by these fires. I notice on our local media we've obviously been pushing about heat and cause to people. Are you going to be doing any promotion or media work to remind people about having fires anywhere in the countryside, so we don't have examples of these horrendous fires in any woods or heathland? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we have been doing some media campaigns, both through social media and through traditional media. We will continue to do those. We have had a number of significant fires in both our woodland over in Lawton, up at Gainsborough, and more locally at Skellingthorpe around field fires and things. We have had a number of fires which have taken up our resources and tragically destroyed areas of natural beauty. So we will continue to do that. We do work with sort of schools and things so they can understand the importance of not setting deliberate fires. And we work with campsites and things like that as well to highlight the dangers of campfires and cooking, etc. But we will continue to do that, yes.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. I have a fire-related one here. Page 21 mentions shop fires. It's also mentioned on further in page 86, but they're almost doubled, Ryan, or even Mark, from 11 to 20. I can't recall shop fires being mentioned too much before, so could you just tell us what's happening there, please?
Yeah, it's a trend we're looking into. At the minute, to be truthful, we don't understand what that spike has been caused by, whether or not it's purely a number of vacant premises. So we're looking into that, and we'll be able to devise a strategy to intervene based on the information that we have.
Okay, thank you. I have one here for Steve on page 42. I may be being a bit pedantic here, but the 2017 figures on the horizontal graph for Lincolnshire say 565, and yet on the vertical graph I say 564. Just one difference, Steve, yeah? Any comments? Yeah, I'm being pedantic. I really am.
You've got me there, Mr. Chairman. It may be one of two things. It could either have been, if we're taking historic data that was reported at the time, then that can be subject to change. For example, a Stats 19 form might be submitted as a slight, but then later progresses under investigation to a serious. So we will update our figures and then re-report the latest. But if that is being taken from historic data we reported at the time, it could be that's what it is. But okay. I'm guessing I'd need to check back. It could just be a typo.
Okay. Okay. And the 2017 comparison chart, is there a more recent one than that? That's 5 years old.
Yeah, there is. I think I've highlighted before. I meant to change that last time, and so I'll make sure that's done before the next one. At the latest annual report I submitted to the committee, I think we got up to 2021 with our comparison, so we can, or certainly 2020, but I can make sure that that figure is updated to that. Okay, and without putting you on the spot, is that more recent one of a similar pattern to how it is here in 2017? Yeah, I think compared nationally, we're always going to be at that end of the scale, so it's not going to change dramatically. Although I do believe, again, without having it in front of me, at the last annual update, we did show that our annual change had improved in recent years, and that we were working better, or had figures that were better than in some of those earlier years. But I will certainly make sure that's provided for the next meeting. Okay, and there's still more to be done, Steve. Clearly, for us to be at this end of the scale, what more can we do? I know you're doing a lot about it. Is there any more we can do, and what you'd like to do? Yeah, my answer to this, I think, always sounds slightly unsatisfactory to others, but my view, and it's a strongly held view, is that we are doing the right things. In an ideal world, I'd just do more of them. So I believe that in order to stop people from committing offences on the road, the only way that we can really do that successfully is where somebody believes that there's a real chance they're going to get caught. And so I think that increasing the amount of police enforcement that occurs, both through cameras and roads policing and neighbourhood policing, is really vital. I think doing more education, be that through national offender driver retraining, or in schools, or at events, or managing operational road risk and working with companies. I think all of that can be increased. The amount of money we have dedicated to advertising, communications, sending messages out, that too. And then, of course, engineering, maintaining the roads, but also making safety improvements. I think, as you've highlighted, a lot of work is done in all of those areas. I think we're quite lucky in Lincolnshire in comparison to other areas that we still have a high functioning road safety partnership that brings together resources and people working together on road safety in this county, and quite a lot of resources dedicated to doing that. So I think comparably we're doing well on that front, but my answer is we just do much more of the same. Okay, thank you. Just one here for trading standards, unsafe products. It's on page 47. I was astounded to see that some of the fake products included car brake shoes. Presumably these are made of substandard materials. I find that quite frightening that we've got vehicles on the road with substandard brakes. Could you add any more to that, Martin?
Chairman, I concur with you. It's a frightening thing to think that people think it's acceptable to do this. with the increase in kind of activities around unsafe products, it's very intelligence led. So where we do get that information, we have got people on hand that can intervene. I certainly will go back and look and see what the trends around it are, because we may need to start doing some specific campaigning to raise awareness to garages and the like, to make sure that actually they are fitting the right brakes, because we can't lower the standards of drivers on the roads anymore.
Exactly. Another one for you, Martin, on page 49 is about the Food Standards Agency extended their deadline for inspections to be completed to 30th of June 2022. We're on target to achieve this. Did we achieve that target? Do you know that?
I'm not aware, but I know Sarah Barry's online. She might have more view on that. She's not online. She's now gone. She was. She's now gone. I don't, but I can check for you, Chairman, and come back to you.
If you could just let us know then. Yeah, sure. Thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to come up briefly on something Stephen just said. My division has quite a lot of very rural parishes in. Some of the bigger, one parish in particular, who are a bigger parish, have just installed some new fixed speed indicator machines which have the message underneath, and they are really effective. They're making such a difference in that village, but they have a precept that's big enough to be able to afford them, whereas another village, which I know also has problems, have no precept because they're so small. And it would be nice if something could be done perhaps to help those parishes that can't afford to buy one themselves. They can't really be shared because they have to be fixed in one place. So that might be something we need to look at, because just because there's only a few people in that village, they have got problems with speeding cars going through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, this is a problem that we have seen in other areas as well. The reactive signs that are purchased by communities as part of the Community Speed Watch scheme can be shared and rotated because it's the faceplate that is put onto street furniture or a pole is installed. Now, we can assist with the installation of the pole if necessary, but that would allow them to be moved from parish to parish. I have a passage that we've written which explains why there isn't a provision for installing these county-wide by either the county council. What we've recommended in the past is parishes try and pool resources and share where possible. Others have managed to secure sponsorship from local businesses and other areas within the community, which has been positive. To be really frank, if we were to do it for one or two, I've probably got on record several hundred other locations that would quite rightly expect the same as well. So in my mind, I'd love to say yes to all of those because I agree with you. I think they are impactful and then they can make a difference, but we simply wouldn't have the resources to be able to provide them for all of those that want them at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 45 is listed a number of goods that were taken out of the public's use, as it were. Could you remind us about officers' time, please? Are the officers expected to work across a number of areas within trading standards, or do you manage to specialise in certain areas? Thank you.
So trading standards has three pillars of work in relation to how they do it, and this piece of work is picked up by the reactive teams, of which there are two teams that cover the county for that. We do operate out of Boston and out of Lincoln as hubs. So we are separated into specialisms. There is some omni-competence across those specialisms, but we tend to stay specialist down three pillars, and the reaction team is the team that would pick up this type of work.
Thank you for that.
Okay, Martin.
Sorry, just an update on your question, Mr Chairman. Yes, we have met the inspection for the 30th.
Okay, thank you. Can see no further speakers, no. So, thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I'm going to move that we receive the report and that the committee records its satisfaction with the performance achieved in Q4. And lastly, that our comments, as recorded, are taken under consideration by relevant officers and portfolio officers. Can members please raise your hands if you agree? Thank you. That is agreed. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Lee.
Chair, given my comments on performance, can I have it recorded that I've abstained on that, please? Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Lee. Yep, noted. Thank you. Item 6, National Flood Rescue Assurance Inspection. This item is on pages 55 to 82 of the agenda pack and informs the committee of the outcomes of the assurance visit and the action plan the service has in place to achieve their recommendations. Our actions as a committee are to review the report and the action plan that has been developed and also provide feedback and note receipt of the inspection report. The report will be presented by Mark Baxter. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So just put it into context, this assurance team that comes through the National Resilience Assurance team is specifically in regards to national assets that we can provide to support national flooding events across the country. It doesn't have an impact in regards to our flood capabilities within Lincolnshire. This is purely in regards to making sure that we are adhering to the requirements for the national asset. So this is part of a 3-year assurance programme, and because of COVID, there's been a delay in this round of the assurance programme. Also, the other significant change that has happened since the last assurance inspection was that there's been an update through the National Fire Chiefs Council's Rescue Boat Code, which had changed the standards required to operate a Type B and a Type C team. And also the DEFRA flood rescue concept of operations had also been updated. So we was working alongside two updated guidance notes. Just to put it into brief context, the difference between a Type B team and a Type C team is pretty much fundamentally a Type B team is allowed to operate within flooded water and has a power boat capability. A Type C team doesn't have the engine in the power boat capability. That's fundamentally what the differences are. So in regards to the inspection, we did come through with an action plan. There were 2 instances of inadequate and there were 8 instances that requires improvement. So we had focused in regards to the action plan to address them to enable us to have 2 Type B teams that will be available for national deployments. The areas that we needed to improve and address was broken down into 2 areas. One is in regards to the training of our instructors to ensure that they had the appropriate qualifications to be able to assess our own team members, which had changed since the last inspection programme. And secondly was an updating of specific PPE that was required, specifically in regards to the types of helmets that are required within the teams. Both of those were changes of standards that happened since the last inspection. What we have done since this programme, and it's probably where the live date is at the moment, we are currently finishing off the training of our instructors to ensure that we are meeting them standards. We've also had some of our instructors that were appropriately qualified that have come back from secondment opportunities that were supporting the national teams, and we've also had instructors that have been on long-term absence that have returned back to work. So our cadre of instructors are back up to the standard of where we need to be, albeit there's a couple of them as we speak today are just finishing off their training to get their accreditation. The equipment that's been required, we are expecting the delivery any day now, so with those 2 elements we are expecting that at the end of this month we would have been adhering to all the recommendations within the action plan. What the National Resilience Assurance team have confirmed with us, we just need to confirm that in writing that the people have finished off their training and our equipment has arrived and they are comfortable. They will automatically put us back onto the National Register for full Type B team accreditation, which enables us to support the national resilience infrastructure in regards to flooding across the country, but also that should give us another level of assurance and confidence in regards to how we've got the right capabilities and strength across our flood rescue teams to respond to any of our local risks across the country, because we will have those 40 personnel across the whole of our cadre that will be dedicated, trained to ensure that they can operate in tidal flooded environments. So yeah, the other thing which I would like to note, Chair, is the fact that there were some areas of notable practice, and that was specifically in regards to our response mobilising and how our systems were robustly in place to ensure that we was able to mobilise assets in a timely manner, and actually how we managed and had a good accountability of our availability of all of our teams across the county. So we have that assurance that actually when those assets are required for whatever reasons, we had notable practice that was able to understand our availability and had the right mechanisms in place to bring them together and to mobilise them in the shortest available time. I'm happy to answer any questions on that report, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Just to be clear, you mentioned the PPE and the helmets. That was one question I got for you. Do you say the delivery of those items is imminent?
Absolutely. I've just had a phone call this morning, actually, and we're expecting to be in our stores any day now.
Yeah, being a safety critical item, I just want to be assured about the helmets. Yeah.
Absolutely, okay. and the area where we wasn't clear what the new standard was going to be in regards to the standards of those helmets. But also we do have the assurance that even our current helmets are still up to the required of the British standard. This is just going over and above the standard that the National Resilience are requiring.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 57 of the report, it did highlight about long-term sick and how it had affected your overall training and the officers. I just wondered, was it COVID related? Was it a physical or mental issue? Are you able to let us know? Were they job related incidents that gave you the long-term sick problem? And I presume that we did support these members of staff throughout the long-term period. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I hope you can understand, I'm not going to be able to share the reasons why people were off for absence, because I think that is a personal issue for the individuals, but I would like to give the absolute assurance that we've supported people throughout their period while they've been absent from work. There is no specific trend in regards to if it's been related to, if it's work related or it's COVID related. It was just a unfortunate time where we had two people that were off long-term absence that were completely unrelated, and there was no trend in there, but they have been absolutely fully supported and they are now back at work.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to say that I take this report as a positive, and I wanted to congratulate everybody within the fire service for their efforts for what they've achieved here. I think they've done well. It's always important to remember that, to my knowledge, it hasn't changed, but the fire service has never been properly funded for flood risk. It was just an extra thing that they were expected to do without any statutory thing, without any extra funding for it. So they've done that as an extra within the money that they're already given, and I think they've done really, really well, and I congratulate them on that and hope that one day they may be funded. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? Okay. It's fair to say, Mark, that it's quite a comprehensive report by the National Resilience Team. It's gone into depth there about things. Just for the benefit of this committee, do all fire and rescue services have national flood rescue assets? And just explain how it's a shared facility and it can be used all over the country, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. No, not all fire and rescue services have this national asset. We have it because fundamentally flooding is one of our highest risks identified within our community risk management plan and also within county council's corporate risk. So it's only right that we have the right capability to support our communities. So clearly there are many fire services across the country that don't require this level of flood response. How it all pulls together, there is a central team that is hosted in Merseyside, Fire and Rescue, and they're what we call our National Resilience Team. If for any reason that any fire and rescue service, any county has significant floodings that go above and beyond what their own capability and assets are able to deal with, they have the option of calling National Resilience, and that central team will coordinate the gathering and the mobilising of assets that are on this on the register to be able to go to that host service, to be able to work side by side with the host service to ensure that they've got the appropriately trained. And the reason why the assurance team comes in is because they want to ensure that there is a consistent level of training and there's a consistent level of PPE and qualified personnel that they can all perform the same level standard of flood rescue. And this is all coordinated through the National Resilience Team that's hosted in Merseyside. And sorry, I just want to say on that is we've often supported national teams, but also we've actually received many examples of actually when we've had support from around the country when we've required them for the Wainfleet floodings and the Boston floodings that we've had over the recent years. So it's a facility that we get as much benefit as we do support.
Okay, thank you. Certainly I've seen on TV, you've been at Leeds and various places. So what's the furthest you've actually been?
The furthest we've been up to Cumbria. We supported Cockmouth, that was many years ago, in regards to where they had some significant floodings. The whole of the National Resilience Team isn't just focused on flooding, it's supported with all of our capabilities. So I think, which is quite topical, we've mentioned about wildfires. We, a couple of years ago, supported Lancashire with our crews to go and support them in regards to the efforts they had of the widespread wildfires continuing. And we've supported Scotland on some of their incidents, particularly when they go in our urban search and rescue teams as well. So we have been across the country.
Okay, thank you. Have we anyone else wishing to speak? No. Okay. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. We got away quite light there then, Mark. Yeah. Okay, so I move that we endorse the report, an action plan developed, and that we request our feedback comments from the debate to be taken under consideration. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? That is all agreed. Thank you. We turn to agenda item 7, which is the Integrated Risk Management Plan 2020-2024 yearly update. This item is on pages 83 to 93 of the agenda pack and provides the committee with an annual progress report on the Integrated Risk Management Plan. The actions of this committee were invited to note the information contained in the end of the year Integrated Risk Management Plan performance update, also to review, consider the scrutiny arrangements, section 3, page 91, and agree the changes to the reported measures, and also finally to approve a public consultation for a change in the way the attendance standards is expressed in the Integrated Risk Management Plan. The report will be presented on this occasion by Ryan, and I would now like to invite, so over to you, Ryan, sorry, getting ahead of myself.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I will start off by going through the end-of-year performance report. This is the midpoint of our 2020 to 2024 Integrated Risk Management Plan. We have this year, or in the last annual cycle, received an inspection from Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabularies and Fire and Rescue Services. A report was presented at the last scrutiny meeting by Mark Baxter, the Chief Fire Officer, so I'm not going to labour that too much, but there are a couple of areas which I will highlight in that. Assuming everyone's read through the report, I'll touch on a few of the key points and then invite questions at the end. So in terms of community safety, our primary tool is the Safe and Well visit, or the Home Fire Safety Check. We've had a period of lockdown which has necessarily caused a reduction in the amount of home fire safety visits we've been able to conduct face-to-face. Last year we conducted 5,259 face-to-face and 1,750 virtual Safe and Well visits. By contrast, when you look at this year, this first quarter, we've done in excess of 2,000 already in just one quarter of the year. So we are on target this year to do circa 10,000 face-to-face Safe and Well visits. That's our target for this year. So just to put a bit of context around that. In terms of protection, members will be aware that we did have a cause of concern from Majesty's Inspectorate around our ability to resource our risk-based inspection programme. We last year identified 427 high-risk buildings that we needed to inspect and audit as part of our risk-based inspection programme. By the end of the year, we'd undertaken 383. 27 of those buildings have been reclassified or were no longer trading, which left 17 outstanding at the end of the year. Those 17 outstanding were inspected within the first 2 weeks of the following year. This year, we are monitoring our risk-based inspection programme very closely, as you'd expect, and we are currently on target to achieve the risk-based inspection programme and all of our other statutory duties. Just to put some of that risk-based inspection work into some context, clearly that was one area that we were picked up through the external inspection. I've presented a summary of some of the other statutory work that those teams are also undertaking, one of which is building regulations consultations, and it won't have escaped anyone's notice that that's getting a lot more scrutiny nationally, particularly through the Grenfell inquiry. As a result of that, and a lot more statutory burden being placed upon us to make sure that we are keeping buildings safe at their design and build stage, rather than waiting to enforce when they've been occupied for a period of time. We have a statutory duty to undertake building regs consultations. There is best practice guidance that we will respond to them within 15 days. We achieve that on about 98% of occasions. Those occasions where we fall short of that, it's normally because they're more complex building consultations. There's a lot more interpretation of plans, a lot more toings and froings between ourselves, other improved inspectors and other organisations. So we are meeting it on most of those occasions, and I'll come back to the reporting of that performance later on in the report. We respond to over 100 complaints each year, and that is a vital work stream of our ability to enforce in some of those buildings which may be in contravention of the regulatory reform fire safety order. We also undertake licensing and petroleum inspections on behalf of Lincolnshire County Council. So that's another draw on our capacity, but another area where we're meeting our statutory obligations. Hazard spots by crews. So this is another vital intelligence stream for us, really. Excuse me. We clearly are required to enforce the regulatory reform fire safety order. The way we do that is by identifying those buildings which are most likely to have the greatest impact should there be a failure of fire. So that's our high-risk, risk-based inspection program. So those are buildings that are occupied by non-ambulant people, so hospitals, care homes, those sorts of buildings. But we also then dip sample lower-risk premises types, and those are the hazard spots that are undertaken by operational crews. So we have an opportunity to dip sample everything else to identify trends across the rest of the built environment, and then inspect should we identify a trend in any of those areas. And we then go on to some of the other performance areas that we monitor on an annual basis. I don't intend to go through those in any great detail, but they're provided in the report for some background information. Chair, I don't know if you want me to take questions on the performance area first, or move straight on through the rest of the report and then come to questions at the end.
Move straight on if you wouldn't mind, Ryan.
Thank you. We recognise, and having had long conversations with the executive member following the HMIC FRS inspection last year, that the performance that we report to through this committee is all fire related. So it relates to our fire statutory duty, but there's no other areas of performance scrutinised at this board. We're proposing a change to some of the performance measures that we take through this committee. So they're not just fire related. So we would bring fire related deaths and injuries, total fires, the number of safe and well visits or home fire safety visits that we're undertaking, which would demonstrate the extent to which we're meeting our community safety statutory duty, buildings regulations consultations, which is another statutory area, our risk-based inspection programme, and finally petroleum licensing, which we discharge on behalf of Lincolnshire County Council. So there would be those proposed areas in place of our current performance measures, and I welcome conversations with elected officials around some of those areas. Which brings us on to the last bit of the report, which is around our attendance standard. Attendance standards are clearly core to what we are measured against and the expectation of the community. In devising an attendance standard, there are a number of hurdles that we need to overcome and decide in terms of the service that we provide to the public. We recognise that currently our attendance standard is based on our ability to attend incidents based on where our fire stations are currently built. So we map the county and we have an attendance standard which is based on our ability to attend incidents from those predetermined locations within a time that we predefine we expect to get there. And that sounds like we're obscuring it, and I think when we reflect on that measure, we would prefer to have a more transparent measure that we can report to the public. If it takes a lot of explanation, then it probably isn't an easy measure to use in a public forum. We've done a lot of work looking at national standards. There is no national standard of fire cover. That was removed back in 2004. It is now incumbent on us to have an attendance standard which meets the needs of the community. I've produced, for interest and information, a group of family measures of other fire and rescue services which are also predominantly rural fire and rescue services. They sit within our family group, just to give you an appreciation of some of the different ways that attendance standards are expressed. What I would say is that currently our attendance standard is above the average for predominantly rural fire and rescue services. We have an attendance standard that we meet on average primary fires within 10 minutes and 20 seconds. That compares to the national average, which is 10 minutes and 27 seconds. So, albeit it's a small betterment, it is a betterment than the national average. Where we struggle with our attendance standard at the minute is that we require to meet that attendance standard on 100% of occasions. So inevitably we fail each year, and then we are measured against that failure to meet the attendance standard. Other fire and rescue services don't have a 100% requirement to meet their attendance standard, and you'll see it expressed in that table from anything between 70 to 85%. You will see a delineation between urban and rural, between operational, whole-time operational and on-call halt stations, and you'll see them expressed as in terms of on average or per incident. We are proposing consulting on an attendance standard which will say that we will respond to dwelling fires within an average of 11 minutes for the first fire engine, and we will respond to all other incidents within an average of 15 minutes for the first fire engine. This is consistent with the way that Her Majesty's Inspectorate currently aggregate and measure all fire rescue services, so it will give a much more transparent view of the way that we are performing against other fire and rescue services, but I would welcome a discussion around that point.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wish to comment? Councillor Lee.
I think you knew I would, didn't you? Just a couple of points, really. First of all, I think that's really positive about the building inspections. I'm really pleased to hear that. Well done, congratulations. My second point, I would agree. I looked at the figures, and ours do compare well to the other areas. So again, that's another positive. But I was looking at them, and it's 15 minutes till a fire engine gets to you, isn't it? And I've been round quite a lot of those training centres where they show you mock-ups and what happens and how quickly fire spreads. And 15 minutes is actually quite a long time. And the question that I wanted to ask you was, and I appreciate you might not be able to give me it today, but it might be an email or a follow-up. How do our response times now compare to what they were pre-2010? Because we've obviously had over a decade of cuts to public service. Were they better sort of pre-2010, or are they about the same? And I honestly don't know the answer, so I would be interested to know. And then the final thing, really, with the IRMP, obviously the feet on the ground, being one of them in the NHS, I know you like to be part of a process when things are being discussed and plans are being made. At what point did the workforce, the FBU, were they included in the process of putting together this IRMP? But on the whole, I think you're doing really well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So a number of areas there. Pre-2010, yeah, I'd have to get back to you on that, but I can certainly provide that information. That's significantly before my time, but I'll provide that information outside of this meeting, and I'll circulate it to all members. Just a point of interest around the 15 minutes for the first fire engine for all other incidents. We've talked long and hard about this, and there is a difference between dwelling fires and other incidents. Dwelling fires are very dynamic. They are getting worse minute by minute by minute. So in terms of survivability, there is a requirement to have that attendance standard a lot quicker. Whereas a road traffic collision, while it is really important that we get there quickly, they're a static incident typically. They've got as bad as they're going to get. And actually now it's about trying to get that person to definitive medical care. So that's why there is a difference in those. That coupled with the fact that we know where our centres of population are. We can't predict where those road traffic collisions are going to be, albeit we do have a bit of a sense of some of that trend analysis. And then your final point about the development of the Integrated Risk Management Plan. So yes, we do involve the FBU in the development of the Integrated Risk Management Plan. We then involve them in the formal consultation process. We are currently in the progress of developing our 2024 to 2028 Integrated Risk Management Plan. Believe it or not, it takes us 2 years to analyse that, and we are involving the FBU in the development of that as we speak. So yeah, thank you.
Mark.
Yeah, I'll just probably I'd give some assurance, because I was here pre-2010. That's the benefit of being around for such a while. So before 2010, we only had 7 whole-time stations. So we went through a process back in 2013, which I'm probably going to touch on in the next paper, where we had investment from LCC to actually increase our whole-time cadre to ensure we have the 9 whole-time stations, our whole-time spine. That did improve our attendance standards because we've got more whole-time stations available across the county. But what we are clear and what we're monitoring is probably the greatest impact is how our on-call are able to get into the station and to mobilise the role. And what I can say is consistently, probably over the last 10 to 15 years, the commitment of our on-call has been absolutely outstanding in regards to them getting into the station. So we're not seeing a significant difference in regards to those attendance standards. So it's just really giving the assurance to yourself and the public that actually it fluctuates, but there's not a significant change in regards to minutes.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you. It was a comment, really, just to thank Ryan and Mark and everyone on the team for how they responded to the HMI report and how they really put a lot of attention and resource on the Integrated Risk Management Plan and addressed that. And it was a huge amount of work. So thank you for doing that. I just want that on record again.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark, followed by Councillor Key.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 84, you list the number of audits that you'd managed to complete. Have you got a database of at-risk premises which would help you should there be a fire in that particular premise? Thank you.
Yes, is the answer to that. So we approach it in 2 ways. We use the NLPG, the National Land Premises Gazetteer, going out on a limb in terms of that acronym, which identifies all the domestic and non-domestic premises in the county. We cross-check that to make sure that we understand what the built environment looks like. We use that to then develop our through the Integrated Risk Management Plan, our risk-based inspection programme. When we go and visit those, we identify whether there are generic or specific risks involved in those processes or the buildings themselves. Many of the buildings that we have are generic, so things like a fuel refilling station has a pretty generic risk. It doesn't matter whether it's holding a roundabout or somewhere in the city of Lincoln, a petrol station is a petrol station broadly. So we would have generic risk assessments and ways of working built around those that's available to our fire crews on our mobile data terminals. And then for those specific risks, we then have a specific risk-based operational risk inspection, which collates some of that risk information specifically for our operational crews, so that an element of pre-planning can be done in advance of our attendance at those incidents. And that, again, is available in electronic form on our mobile data terminals. And for those significant risks, the operational crews will exercise on a periodic basis or undertake familiarisation visits to some of those high-risk buildings so that they can gain a familiarity and understand what their initial actions would be at an incident at that dwelling or premise.
Thank you for that. An additional comment, if I may. Because of the large number of airfields that we've got, I know you've mentioned before the cooperation that you have with their independent fire service. Has there been any joint operations recently with that element?
I would struggle to give you any specifics, but we do work continually with our MOD and RAF fire colleagues. So we would liaise right the way across all of our operational and non-operational bases. So clearly the obvious ones such as Waddington, Coningsby, Cranwell, etc., which clearly have very, very visible flying activity. We'll also work with places such as Digby, that have their own fire section to understand the risk that's at their establishment and work with them to mitigate that risk and train and exercise with them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. I just want to go back to page 92 again and these proposed new standards. I can see that they're an average of 11 and 15 minutes, and I don't want to hark on, but I come from a rural area, and I wonder what reassurance these standards would be to people who live in a rural area, because we're not actually saying we'll be there in 11 minutes, we're saying we'll be there in an average of 11 minutes. Well, I just want, how is that going to be explained to people who perhaps live further away, and what reassurance can you give them? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we are very aware that we don't want to create a postcode lottery in terms of the way that we respond to risk in the county. We also need to be, and it's been mentioned at this meeting earlier on, in terms of if we had a magic wand and could put resource everywhere, then we absolutely would, but that comes at a cost. The piece of work that we do in the background to ensure that we can be at those incidents quickly is to understand where risk exists and make sure that we've got fire resources in those areas of greater risk, so that more often than not we can meet that stretched attendance standard. I think what we can commit to doing is ensuring that when we report this data, we also report the outliers. And ultimately, it's the reduction in deaths and injuries, which is the thing that we're seeking to achieve. This is almost a proxy measure of our ability to do that.
Yeah, I do agree with you on the outlying figures, because they're the ones that would concern people. We have the same argument about average speeds for vehicles, that it's not the people going 32 miles an hour, it's the idiot that's driving through our village at 80 miles an hour who's likely to cause damage. And of course, those outlying figures for fires would be very useful to see, because obviously the average doesn't tell the whole picture. Thank you.
Mark.
Yeah, sorry, and it goes to another thing coming there. Clearly, we're focusing heavily on our response strategy, which is in regards to obviously when people dial 999 and we send the most appropriate resource. That can't be in isolation, so it's our prevention strategy that is particularly focused within our rural areas in regards to educational awareness, and we have the teams to go out there to work within our local communities to help people be safe in the first place, because really what we'll be looking for is to ensure that those fires don't happen in the first place. So it has to be a blended approach in regards to our prevention and our response strategies to ensure that we're keeping everybody within Lincolnshire as safe as they can.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Corey.
Thank you. On that, Mark, do you just want to explain to members about our Sherman initiative and how we identify those characteristics and work with our colleagues across the County Council?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I do a Ross Mark because I always have to try and remember the exact wording of the Sherman. So between Brian and I will meet it. So Sherman's really born out of the risk analysis work that we've done to actually identify where we, as a group of people that are probably at the most high risk and vulnerable within our communities. Sherman's an acronym which is smoking, hoarding, elderly, reduced mobility, alcohol dependent, and needs additional support. I think I've spelt out Sherman, haven't I? Medication, sorry, thank you. So that's the reason why we find that really powerful, and we're working with all of our partner agencies across County Council, because actually we think it's really important that every touchdown that people have with our vulnerable people counts and matters. So actually the eyes and ears of all of our partner agencies are absolutely invaluable to actually identify where these vulnerable people are across the county, and then we can feed in with each other to actually see is actually once they've been identified, we can have the appropriate support to go out and visit them, or agencies can actually deliver the message on our behalf as well. So it's absolutely a collaborative strategy to ensure that first of all we identify and we know who our vulnerable people are, and then we actually use our resources across all agencies to share the messaging to ensure that people are safe and have some really specific fire safety messages, and where they are where they need bespoke fire safety specialist advice, we've got our dedicated community safety advocates that can go out there and visit those people that fit within that Sherman criteria.
Thank you. Just regarding response times, I know certainly in my division there's some villages out there where it's not humanly possible to get there in that 11 minutes because there's a fire station nowhere near them. Probably more like 15, 16 minutes, but you know that better than me. Also, it's no quicker from a over-the-border pump either. So I suppose in reality those figures are skewed somewhat by some of those figures, which where they do take a long, long time to get there. And it's just be good to know that all the fire prevention you can do is aimed at those sort of areas where you can't reach those times. Okay, thank you. Any further comments? No, just turning then to page 91 where we've got those two lots of figures there. Just for the benefit of the committee, you've got the indicators there of the first lot and the second lot. Is it an additional lot or is that to replace the first lot?
Yeah, that would be to replace the first lot rather than increasing the burden of scrutiny.
So there'd be one additional indicator there for us to scrutinise.
That's great.
Yeah, which is good. I think that will provide more depth for scrutiny and additional items will aid that too. Yeah, thank you. I can see no further comments. No, okay. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee receives and endorses the report, that we have reviewed and agreed on the changes proposed to the reported measures, and that we also approve of a public consultation to be carried out for the purpose of achieving change in the way the attendance standards is expressed in the Integrated Risk Management Plan. Excuse me. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? That's all agreed. Thank you. Right, a good old session with Fire and Rescue today, aren't we? Another one now. Agenda item 8. Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service, Lincolnshire crewing arrangements. This item is on pages 95 to 140 of the agenda pack. The report informs us on proposals which will be considered by the Executive Councillor for Fire and Rescue and Cultural Services prior to consultation with the workforce. The actions are this committee is invited to consider this report and make comments on the proposals, and also share our views with the Executive Councillor for Fire and Rescue and Cultural Services. The report will be presented by Mark Baxter. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take it that everybody's read through the report and recognise there's quite a lot of technical data in regards to the report. So I'll just go through to get an overall understanding of what we're trying to achieve. So currently we have, as I touched on it earlier, 9 whole-time stations across the county of Lincolnshire. One of those is at Lincoln South, which is made of a duty system that operates where crews work 2 days, 2 nights, and then 4 off. The other 8 duty systems is what is called a Lincolnshire crewing system. Now that is a crewing system that we put in place back in 2013 through a local agreement with the Fire Brigade Union. That duty system primarily is based on, we have whole-time firefighters that work on a predominantly 4 on 4 off shift system, although sometimes they do 5 on 3 off, but 4 on 4 off in broad terms, where they are on duty during the day and their evening commitments are integral to that duty system. So therefore, in the evenings, they have to provide close proximity response, so that unless they live literally within 5 minutes of the stations, then they will be staying in one of our bespoke accommodations that we've put across every single one of those 8 whole-time stations. So in essence, they are there 24/7 for the 4 days and nights when they are on duty. The rationale behind that back in 2013 was built on the fact that prior to then, we did not have the robust training program that we have for our on-call personnel now. And actually from the learning on some of the incidents that we attended, there was recognised that there was an operational gap in regards to the technical skills that our whole-time personnel had and to our on-call had. So we needed to give the assurance that we had what we call now as a whole-time spine across the whole of the county to ensure that the people of Lincolnshire had the highest standards. While we put this in place, we also reviewed our on-call training programme and developed an extremely robust and actually has been has been used nationally in a lot of other fire and rescue services on a 3-year training programme. So our on-call personnel now receive the same level high standard of all of our whole-time personnel. So that's a significant piece of work that has ensured that actually we have the assurance and the confidence that actually the firefighters, when they go out there, they are giving you that first-class high training that they've got. The other element that has also come into play is we did some engagement across the whole of our workforce, and the overwhelming feedback that we got from our workforce, and also engagement that we had with people who wanted to enter a recruitment programme for our whole-time personnel, recognised actually the restrictions of this Lincolnshire crewing system was becoming difficult for personnel. Being away from their families for 4 or 5 days and nights at a time wasn't conducive in regards to supporting family life. And also we recognised it was becoming a significant barrier in regards to how we were wanting to recruit a wider diverse areas across the whole of our communities. We have evidence and absolute evidence that people wanted to come into the fire service, was really engaged and enthusiastic, wanting to join Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, but when they really understood the restrictions of the duty patterns they may have to work, said, well, actually, that probably isn't going to be for me. So that is something that we wanted to address, to give more flexibility and options for people to work on our whole-time duty systems. The other significant factor that came in is our ongoing and healthy and positive relationship we have with the Fire Brigades Union. The duty patterns that we currently have has been born out of a local agreement that has been worked together between ourselves and the Fire Brigade Union. Their position is since 2013 is of a desire to change local agreements and to enter in discussions with all fire and rescue services across the country who have similar duty patterns. We are by no exception on this. Across the country, there's been many services that have unfortunately had to almost go down the route of going through to court proceedings in regards to having legal challenge. We are not in that position with regards to our relationship with the Fire Brigade Union. We're having healthy discussions in regards to how we work together to ensure that we've got a fit for the future duty pattern that has an absolute balance of ensuring that we can attract the right people within the organisation, we can develop within the organisation, but we also meet the risks and the needs for the people of Lincolnshire, which is a really important element of this piece of work. So moving to the position, what we're looking at recommending now. So we've used a lot of the data and the information through what's called FRAM, which is a Fire Risk Assessment Methodology, which is a national methodology which is used to, it brings in all the data to understand the community dynamics, demographics, historic data, local risk, that brings us through it to understand where is our higher risks within the county of Lincolnshire, and that gives us some clear indications where's the best places to put our resources to respond appropriately. We also reviewed the last 4 to 5 years data in regards to where were our busiest stations, where they were getting mobilised, where they were getting called out to ensure that actually we've got the right resources in the right place. What the outcome of all that work and the data analysis that came through is, what it recognises actually, it's still absolutely right and appropriate that we have what we call a 2 days off, 2 nights and 4 off, a 224 station at Lincoln South. It's also recognised that 7 of our Lincolnshire crewing stations is still absolutely right that we have whole time availability at night as well as during the day because of the volume of calls and the risks within those areas. But what it did identify is within Sleaford Fire Station's area that the risk is actually there during the day, is in regards to the mobilisations that we have, and actually how the risk, as all local communities, risk change differently between during the day and during the night, because obviously communities move and shops and industry close and open at different times, and our communities are quite transient. What it did outline is actually during the core nighttime hours, demand was lower at Sleaford than it was on several of our on-call stations, and the risk was lower as well. So what that's driven us through is to we want to put through a consultation for a proposal that we change the Sleaford crewing model, which will mean that we will not require the whole-time personnel to give the evening cover. We will still require them to operate a duty system that is 7 days a week. It'll be a cross-watch system, so not everybody's working 7 days a week, to ensure that we're giving immediate daytime cover. What that would mean is that to ensure that we have whole-time firefighters that do give us whole-time cover at the night, they are all paid an allowance, an enhancement. So we wouldn't require that allowance and enhancement for our Sleaford crews. So we would utilise that funding to ensure that we recruit and support our on-call personnel to provide that additional support, not just at Sleaford but across other areas within the county, because we also recognise that on-call stations is an area where investment is always still required there to ensure that we have our recruitment and retention strategy to keep all of our appliances available. So in summary, we've done the review of the decisions that were made back in 2012, which was consulted on and agreed in 2013. We've recognised that we've now got far more intelligence-led data and understanding and demand that identifies where our risk lies across the whole of the county. And what we are now wanting to consult on is actually a change for Sleaford Station that would remove the requirement for having whole-time personnel at night, but giving everybody the assurance that we've got a strong on-call availability at Sleaford, and actually the savings would be there to continue and bolster the support at Sleaford and other stations to ensure that the local communities still have that same level of response.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you. Obviously, I live near Sleaford, so particularly interesting. And bearing in mind what I said before about response times, what effect will this have on response times in the Sleaford area, do you think?
We're expecting to have a minimal impact, and the reason we say that, because the whole-time personnel that cover on the evenings, they have the same response standard as an on-call firefighter. So, for example, they can still have 5 minutes to come into the station. There are on-call personnel that also have the same contract where they have to respond within 5 minutes of the station. I can't guarantee at this moment in time until we do some more detailed work, which we'll work through on that consultation period to work through that. But we're not anticipating a significant change in regards to the response standard. The bit that which I'm identifying is the savings that we would have in regards to not paying the allowances for the whole time. That would enable us to recruit more on-call personnel that may even live closer to the station to ensure that we maintain that response standard within Sleaford.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. It's a really good comprehensive report, really useful. I wanted to ask a couple of questions because I have spoken to firefighters about some of what's in here. And my first question, page 97, you talk about having 20 personnel, which would be 4 watches of 5 people. And the comment that I've heard is that the service is at times, running on bare bones. And I'd like to ask how often, approximately, that you've only got 4 people on a vehicle and not 5, because apparently that 5th person is often the breathing safety officer, and you know that's about people's lives, isn't it, that's safe? So that's my first question, and it is purely a question. The second comment that I got was that compensatory rest can be disturbed. I'd asked you, when someone's been called out, I'd asked you to comment on that. Your comments about Sleaford, I'd actually agree with, and I've said the people I've talked with within the service agree with those comments as well. And finally, the second to bottom paragraph talks about the service is in a position to change the way it delivers its operational response to maintain efficiencies and manage suitable business continuity. I just want to be assured that things are being run the way that they're run for safety reasons. I do understand that finances have to come into it, but that they've not, but that consideration hasn't been overriding. It is about this is the best way, because obviously practice evolves and changes. I get that, but it's not just about money that changes. So those are my questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You may have to remind me on a couple of them as I go through all my answers. The first one in regards to the 20 personnel, that's specifically relating to Lincoln Station. That's where we have the 20 personnel. In regards to our ridership, we have an optimum ridership of 4, which is deemed as the safe practice, but we would always aspirationally wanting to have 5 on an appliance, but we do recognise that that isn't always possible. But we do not go below the minimum crewing of 4. That's what we do not allow. And we've often, through the period, particularly over the last couple of years or so, we have had to rely on our on-call personnel that we bring in to ensure that we support our whole-time personnel. That's been for a couple of factors, because we have had some long-term absences, which all organisations have probably had to gone through that pressure in regards to the period of COVID. We have had a period where we've had more people leaving the organisation than what we anticipated, due to one of the main factors is pension rule changes, and people have left the service. So we've been going through our whole time recruitment process. So I'm pleased to say that now we actually have an above establishment across the whole of our whole time to ensure that we can, and it links into that business continuity arrangements and the resilience to be in place. But in regards to the comment about absolute safety, what we are very clear on is actually 4 is our minimum. And actually we review our predetermined attendances to ensure that we get the right amount of personnel going to an incident, that is not just about a question that we will mobilise the amount of appliances as a unit. We will actually work that out about actually if we had 4 on every single appliance, what would be the minimum amount of personnel we need to do that. And if that means our predetermined attendance needs to include another 1 or 2 appliances, we build that in within our mobilising structure immediately. So ensuring that everybody has the right amount of personnel at that incident to be able to operate safely of all of those operations in there.
There was the bit about the compensatory rest, and just
Yes.
the comment, the 5th person that you would have previously had riding on that machine would have been the person who's the breathing safety person. Is that correct? So that's what's gone if you're only riding 4.
Not necessarily. There are safe systems and work and national standards that go through all of our training to ensure that we're able to deploy breathing apparatus with a crew of 4. It's called a rapid deployment technique, which is I think the terminology has actually slightly changed. The national guidance has literally just been updated, but that technique has been well embedded across all of our fire stations. It's been embedded nationally, so we can deploy immediately, but again linking into our predetermined attendance, the supporting appliances of an additional person will come in and then take over that role as soon as they get there. So we have got them tried and tested safety. Compensatory rest, absolutely. So there's 2 elements in regard to that element of it. Compensatory rest is clearly when people have been, when they are committed to that station for 4 or 5 days. We don't want people to be working 24/7. We absolutely want to ensure that people's welfare is at the heart. Compensatory rest ensures that actually if they have been out all during the night, that they are able to have rest periods. But we also are clear and understanding if there is a life risk incident, they can get called in to respond, and that's agreed. We had recently just done a local review of that, and I'm pleased to actually say the local review was actually done in collaboration with every single firefighter on the Lincolnshire crewing system, and our area manager response went to every station, and we sat down and engaged with them and discussed actually how is probably the most fairest way that we can ensure that you get your compensatory rest, but we also have appliance availability for when our communities need them, and they've worked through a new agreement that enables them to get the rest periods that they require, but also ensures that we can guarantee that we've still got that appliance availability when it's needed.
Thanks for your comments, and I feel your pain. I work in the NHS, and I know trying to put people round to cover what needs covering can be really, really difficult, so I do understand.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yeah, sorry, I want to bring us back to Sleaford again, if that's all right. The consultation, the timetable, and it's through the summer holidays, this 30 days, through August, when a lot of people are obviously away and what have you. What publicity are you going to do about it? And who are you actually going to consult by writing to them and contacting them directly? It's just important, I think, that people don't miss the opportunity to speak simply because it's the summer holidays. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor, and that's an absolute fair, legitimate question in regards to that. So we're going to be working with Lincolnshire County Council engagement team and work through together a robust engagement plan to ensure that we do capture as many people as possible. I'm happy to take back and review that if we need to extend that consultation period so we do get as many people's feedback. Clearly, some key areas that we're absolutely going to be wanting to engage with, and that will be obviously our own staff, the work in this, the duty patterns. It will be all our representative bodies, and then also clearly within key areas affected for the Sleaford local area. Of course, we want to welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I was
views as
particularly
well, and councillors, yes.
thinking of the parish councils
Yes,
in the area, because a lot of them don't have meetings in August, so they would miss the consultation perhaps completely if you were going to ask them for comments. You know, they just wouldn't be meeting, and it is probably the worst month to have a consultation. So we need to make the best of it if we've got to have it now. Thank you. Absolutely.
No, that's something that we'll take back, and then we'll consider to ensure that we do make sure that we touch base with, particularly with the parish councils within Sleaford in that period. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs Clark, followed by Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for the report. As usual, in-depth and very informative. Really pleased to see it. I just want to ask a question. You touched on recruitment and people leaving the service and attracting people to the service. Can you explain to me or go into a bit more detail about how certain you are that these proposed changes will improve your chances of recruitment? Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be honest, it is one of the key drivers for the conversations we had right at the beginning of the question being, why would we want to change? And actually, the conversation started from two areas. One is actually from our own staff. So myself personally, the rest of my senior leadership team and executive councillors, we commit and spend a lot of time going around to our stations and ask them directly, how are things for you and how they're operating? And we do get consistent feedback is actually they overwhelmingly enjoy working for Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue, get an awful lot of satisfaction. The one bugbear is the restrictions of the duty pattern within our Lincolnshire crewing system. So we do recognise that we need to be aware of that, and we want to ensure that we are able to be supportive and we can nurture our talent through the organisation. And if the duty systems are or do potentially become so restrictive that people want to look at other fire and rescue services that are within our region that have more flexible duty patterns, we wouldn't want to lose some of our really talented people to other services. We've got first-hand experience and feedback through our previous whole-time recruitment campaigns where people have come for have-a-go days and information days where they just want to know more about Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue and what it's like working for the fire service. And it's clearly a really attractive role that people want to come to, but people have said, well, that's great, but actually I don't think I can. I've got a young family. I don't think I can be away from my children. I don't think that's going to work with my homework balance if I have to commit to being away from my family home for 4 or 5 days and nights at a time. So we do know that that is a barrier. Not to a barrier to the fact that we don't get inundated with applicants, and not a barrier to the fact that we don't get sort of really talented people coming through, but we do want to ensure that we become an employer of choice for all people within our communities, to ensure that we do represent the diverse nature of Lincolnshire and being focused on actually what are the demographics of Lincolnshire, and we want to work really hard to ensure that we match that within Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue.
Okay, Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed on your consultation periods, could I ask, were there any strong objections from certain officers, and did that relieve to any resignations? You did comment you'd lost a few, but you're now getting back to full strength. And similarly, I presume there was a full research programme done, and it sounds like you've done plenty of consultation. But did you do any outside comparisons as to how you operate to other organisations? And on your data analysis, which is very extensive, was that a programme that was brought in, or was that something you compiled within the organisation? Thank you.
No, thank you, Councillor. So in regards to the engagement and the situational awareness, I'll call it, in regards to our staff and people there. So the whole of this work has been done in collaboration with our staff and also within the rep bodies. What we pulled together was what's called a joint working group to actually, we outlined actually what is it we're trying to achieve. So collaboratively with our workforce and with the rep bodies came actually up with the proposals themselves and to ensure that it met the needs of Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue in regards to our statutory duties and how we need to respond to the community of Lincolnshire. But also it was addressing the concerns of the workforce and the rep bodies. So I'm very confident to actually the whole process that we've gone through has been done in a very collaborative nature to ensure that we've gathered the views, to ensure that it is, even at this point, before we've gone out of consultation, it is a well-supported proposal within our organisation. In regards to when I mentioned about some of our firefighters that we know that have left our whole-time cadre, we know that from the discussions that some of them have left because they wanted to go to other fire and rescue services that had more flexible working arrangements. But also what it is worth caveating that is they were firefighters that lived outside of the county, and actually and many of them had to travel distances to come and work our duty systems. And on one hand, it is quite pleasing that we was able to attract people from all over the country to come to work within Lincolnshire, but also recognising that actually for them personally it wasn't sustainable when their family lived so many miles away, and actually if they had the option to work in their host fire and rescue service where they lived, that was their preferred option. So that probably just caveating that area in regards to that. The final point in regards to the FRAM analysis and all the data and the analysis in there. So that is quite an embedded data analysis system that we have in place. And it's really important that we have that embedded within the service because it actually supports not just our response strategy, but as we touched about, our prevention strategy and our protection strategy. So we have the assurance and confidence that we're actually, all of our strategies are using the same data and the same analysis. So when we are overlaying all that information onto our maps and we're identifying where some of our higher risk areas are, it's not just, well, how do we respond to that? We use that same information about how we get our community fire safety advocates to support those areas, how our protection teams can go and work with our business in those local areas. So we have that blended approach that has the same consistent information, data and analysis to have that picture for us. But it is absolutely embedded in all we do within the service.
Thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you. Mark, bottom paragraph of page 97 states there was a challenge from the Fire Brigades Union in relation to the Lincolnshire crewing system. It also goes on to say that other fire services in England have tried to mandate this duty system on their staff, but have had to withdraw it as it has been identified by the Health and Safety Executive as non-compliant with the Working Time Directive. If I'm reading this right, the only real change is Sleaford, and the rest of these 7 stations are sticking with the Lincolnshire crewing system. With that in mind about the Health and Safety Executive and the Fire Brigades Union, how do you square that circle?
So there's some fundamental differences between how we approached the Lincolnshire crewing system and how other fire rescue services had. So as we was one of the first services to adopt this type of system, we did do it through a local agreement with the Fire Brigades Union. Other services hadn't gone down that route and they imposed a duty system without a local agreement. The crux of court rulings that had been against other fire and rescue services was based on the fact that actually it wasn't a locally agreed duty system. So that was where the challenge was. In regards to the working time directives, that's where the element within the compensatory rest, which is a really important factor in regards to having a Lincolnshire crewing system, is to ensure that we can become working time compliant, because we can then evidence to give the options that people get their rest periods away from their place of work. And then I suppose the final element of it is, yes, absolutely, the Fire Brigade Union, they have the option, and both sides have the options in regards to a local agreement to have a position of withdrawing, serving notice of withdrawing from 6 months. I think it's worth noting is because we've got a positive working relationship with the representative bodies, we don't need to go down that route, and that's why we had early engagement and discussions about how we can ensure that we can satisfy working time directives. We can have an agreed signed local agreement that supports both the workforce needs and our response needs for our communities of Lincolnshire. And most importantly, that we all agree that it's future-proofed, that actually we don't have to keep revisiting this position in regards to the legal basis. A final element which is worth pointing out that HSE has previously asked us to provide evidence and support in regards to how we came about our duty patterns and our systems and our local agreements, and they had written back to us formally saying that they had no issues in regards to our current duty systems, so we are legally compliant in the eyes of the HSE.
Part of the marketing for doing this at Sleaford was that personnel couldn't spend enough time with their families and whatever. Some had left because of this, and yet it still stands at the 7 other stations.
Yeah, so again, another an interesting piece of work that we did, and when actually the Fire Brigade Union commissioned this work, was a survey through all members that work the Lincolnshire crewing system, and 80% of them stated strongly agree that they wish to stay on this duty system because they recognised that actually they lived close to where the station was, they valued the benefit of being giving that on-call commitment at night, and it did fit many of the home work-life balances. But what we was clear is to actually support that 20% that it didn't, and actually giving the flexibility of alternative duty patterns. So we have the flexibility of moving people around different stations if their circumstances change. The other element which is worth pointing out is on the other 7 stations, having the evening commitment is going to be part of the contract, but we'll also risk assess that, and we will be able to, because when we look at their on-call availability, have the flexibility of having some of those personnel not give the whole time cover during the evening if for family reasons they don't need to. But we do need a core of those whole-time personnel to provide that on-call to ensure that all our assets are available.
Just one more from me. Assuming this works at Sleaford, and I have no doubt that it won't work, yeah? Because let's face it, we've turned full circle. We've gone around to doing what used to happen years ago at some stations, and you remember that. But if it is successful at Sleaford, do you see this happening at other stations, some of those other 7 stations?
Yeah, I mean, all I would say on that is that we will follow the risk data and how the dynamics will evolve for the community of Lincolnshire. I wouldn't want to predict that actually the risk changes within the communities that means that we would roll this out to other 7 stations. It could also mean that as we continue reviewing where the risks are and the demands are, we may need to actually put in a paper that might want to increase establishment in some areas. I think we need to ensure that we follow where the data and follow where the risk analysis goes to ensure that we've got the right response, because that's what's brought us down to the conclusion we've come to, that is that actually we've followed the data and we've followed the risk as the communities of Lincolnshire are evolving.
Sure. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the close proximity crewing, because I was rereading my papers last night at 9 o'clock, as you do. And I thought, I don't know what close proximity crewing is. So I tried to phone a couple of people who, of course, didn't answer me at 9 o'clock at night. So I did a bit of Googling, which can be a dangerous thing to do. But according to what I found on Google, it said that it could mean that firefighters, the close proximity crewing, they were on call, they were on duty for a day shift, then they stayed on the premises at night, and it meant that in effect they could actually be on duty for 96 hours. That's what it said. I don't know if that's correct or not. And the other thing, I also saw that it was South Yorkshire that went to the High Court, and it was deemed unlawful. So that's why it was stopped. Is all of that correct?
Close proximity crewing and Lincolnshire crewing system, the terminology is very similar, but there are some significant nuances. If I can probably touch on the South Yorkshire example, because that is what's probably gathered an awful lot of national interest at the time. And that was in regards to the fact that they brought in a duty system that wasn't locally agreed. And they brought it in without the considerations that we've got within Lincolnshire crew system about the compensatory rest periods. So there were some significant nuances that South Yorkshire had that what we have, and how we've implemented and how we manage that system. The other element in broadly what you're saying is, are they available on duty for that 96 hours? Well, yeah. Fundamentally, they are there giving positive hours during their core hours during the day, and then they'll go to either their home address if they live within 5 minutes of the station, or if they don't, then we provide accommodation where they go home. I say the times their own. They can, I suppose, watch telly, they can do what they like, but they're just available for operational incidents, very much like an on-call firefighter, who is he or she is there at home doing whatever they're doing at home or within 5 minutes of the station, and are available for an operational response. So it's really pretty much the same ethos as an on-call firefighter, which is, as we know in Lincolnshire, is kind of the backbone of our operational response model within the county. But I think the key elements is to tease out of your point, it was absolutely valid, is that within Lincolnshire, we came to this duty system with a local agreement that was developed through a joint working group with the Fire Brigade Union at the time to agree how it was going to operate. And actually the compensatory rest element of it is absolutely there to ensure that we maintain the safety and the welfare of our operational crews at all times. Absolutely, and they do get disturbed, but the times that they get disturbed is because of a 999 call when there's an emergency going on, and I would expect their firefighters to be there ready, willing and able to respond to the communities when that 999 call comes through.
Yeah, just final comment. I do take your point, but that has an impact on that person, doesn't it? Whatever the reason for it, being disturbed.
Could you just put your mic on, please? I'm struggling to.
It will come on. Yeah, there is an impact on that firefighter, of being disturbed during the compensatory rest, however important the reason that is. I mean, I've often wanted to go off on a shift and something has come into the hospital and you just can't go home, you have to stay. And I get that, but it does impact on you.
Yeah, and that's the impact that we're trying to mitigate, and actually by giving alternative flexible duty patterns that ensures that we can address as many concerns as possible. Again, I'll probably refer back to the survey that was completed by the Fire Brigade Union. Within there, there's 80% of our staff wanted to stay on that duty pattern, and they wanted to respond in that manner because they recognise that value. I think it's also worth recognising that, yes, we do go through fluctuations of extremely busy periods, and then when we work with those stations, and we have taken personnel offline and brought in cover moves when we know that they have been busy. But broadly across the year, we have stations that have more periods where they don't get disturbed as well. So, but it's making sure that the assurance for our people of Lincolnshire knows that that asset is available when they need it the most.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes the questions. Yes, so okay, thank you. As before, I'm going to propose that the committee supports the report and that we've received and agreed on our comments as recorded today to be passed on to the executive portfolio holder. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you to Ryan and Mark. Thank you. Item 9, performance of the library service contract, 6-year review report. This report is on pages 141 to 156, and it provides an update on the contract performance information on the 6th year of the outsourced library contract to Greenwich Leisure Limited. The actions for this committee is that we are to consider and comment on the performance information, including the report, also to consider and support the ongoing development and proposed Year 7 developments highlighted in the report, and highlight any additional priorities for consideration. The report will be presented by Louise Egan, who is the Library and Heritage Client Lead. I also understand... Online, I believe we've got Deanna Edwards with us. Excuse me, is Matt Perrin also with us? No. Okay, so online we've got Deanna Edwards from Greenwich Leisure. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. So as many of you will be aware, in 2016, Lincolnshire County Council outsourced its statutory library service in order to ensure a cost-effective and high-quality service within the financial constraints that everyone obviously was feeling at that time. GLL were awarded the contract and that remains in place until March 2026. And it's fair to say since the start of that contract, GLL have brought vast improvements to the library service as a whole across the whole of our region. And Year 6 was no different to that. Of course, they had the challenging landscape and changing landscape of COVID and COVID recovery to also consider throughout Year 6 of the contract. And if you look at page 155, that will illustrate the offer that was available throughout the year, where we changed from click and collect services back into browsing, where our customers could be back inside and operating and using the public network, so the free PCs that were available to our customers. Say that the main takeaways for Year 6 were that the core and mobile libraries were visited over 500,000 times, that we had over 1 million physical issues of stock, so physical stocks that customers were using and borrowing. And on top of that, we had nearly 400,000 digital issues that customers were using online at their own homes. And on top of that, we had 500,000 website visits. So whilst I think it's worthwhile acknowledging some of these are lower than the targets that were set, I think we need to remember that these targets were set at the start of the contract back in 2016 and obviously don't reflect and take into consideration the global pandemic that we went into, and obviously many of the restrictions that impacted on people physically being able to get to a site because the site wasn't open, and likewise people's own concerns around going out and visiting public spaces where other members of the communities were from. And that did have a significant impact on the amount of people that were visiting our sites. And likewise, we do need to remember that we had some significant closure periods throughout Year 6, both with core sites because of their roof works and property amendments that were happening at site, which then meant we had a click and collect service. And also we had some closures across community hubs as they were recovering from COVID. And they tended to reopen a little bit later than what our core sites did, primarily because they are managed by volunteers. So I think a lot of them had further considerations about whether they could be reopening those sites for their own requirements. But what I would say is overall it was still a positive impact that we had. We still had significant issues and attendance at our sites, and also just to say that those figures are mirroring national trends. So it's not just Lincolnshire that experienced reduced visits. It is a national trend across the whole library service. And as I say, page 155 does bring the additional detail and breakdown of those KPIs. Although again, it is worth noting, because we were in COVID, LCC took the stance that we didn't have to formally report against those KPIs, but we did monitor them on a month-by-month basis, and GLL did provide all of that information throughout the year for us. What I think is interesting is that GLL have been able to do some additional analysis on our trends, and the pandemic showed that there is still a really high need and usage for physical issues. So of all of the issues that we had throughout Year 6, 80% of those were still done in person. So 80% of the borrowing was individuals coming into sites and learning those materials. 11% were digital, which is higher than what we'd had pre-pandemic, and 8% used both online services and in-person services. And what we've realised is that a lot of individuals had to use the digital access during the points of COVID and when sites were closed. But the majority of those have then reverted back to physically attending in site now that sites have reopened. And in line with that, we have noticed that those e-issues, as I've said, have significantly increased throughout the 2 years of COVID, to the point that it's almost seen as an additional kind of 16th core site, because we are getting that many interactions digitally that we didn't have before the pandemic was introduced. And what Year 7 will bring, or is already bringing rather, is additional analysis from GLL so that we can truly understand that changing trend. Those people are using one service provision over the other, those that are using a hybrid service, just to ensure that we can really structure what our offer is to customers to be able to match their needs. And as Will already mentioned in performance, the pandemic did bring about significant changes in usage and trends. So in terms of visit patterns, so customers are still attending the sites, but not as regularly. And when they are attending, they're borrowing more items at a time, so they don't have to go out as often. And there are other trends of people coming into sites in the morning, which I think is kind of a bit of a hangover from COVID, where people were only out for 1 hour at a time in a day. So they're doing their activities in the morning still. So we are having a few quieter times in an afternoon. But again, GLL are working on that, looking at the usage of our customers and also looking at what other activities and events we can bring in to try and get more people through the doors for those afternoon periods. Speaking of events, it wasn't until August and September of last year that physical activities were happening back in sites, and that was following Libraries Connected, which is our sector's guidance around when we could bring those back in. But they were really well utilised, and customers, particularly kind of those with younger families, were really welcoming the fact that events and activities were happening back in sites. They could get the children back out into those familiar environments and settings. But what was interesting again, and something great that although may seem small and minor, had a real impact on our users, is that GLL attended and created activity packs for children. And these were available to either take away from the site. So if customers didn't want to stay in an enclosed environment with the small child, they could take it home, so that the children still got to be able to engage in library activities. Or they could come back to the site predominantly in an afternoon when it was quieter, so that they'd got more confidence and reassurance about the environment that they were sitting within. So while I say it's quite a small change that they've done, we did see a real benefit and a lot of positive feedback from our customers around how they'd taken that into consideration, and taken into consideration the actual users' behaviours and their needs. And that is something that GLL have continued and will continue with throughout the remainder of the contract. And as you can see there was over 18,000 attendees during sort of August 2021 to March 2022 of those activities. The other area I think that's worthwhile highlighting from Year 6 is again the additional IT infrastructure that GLL has brought throughout all of the library service. And in particular how important this has been throughout COVID. We did see an influx of individuals needing to come back into site and use the public networks and that free resource that was available to them. However, because we've made changes with it, individuals didn't need to stay on the PCs as long, because the software and the hardware was operating at a higher frequency than what our old systems were. So it meant that more people could utilise the PCs than what they previously did do. And what we have done for this year going forwards, that we'll report on next year, is look at both the number of hours of PN use, but the sessions, so that we can see that there are more people that are utilising the resource, which I think probably gives a better indication of how that resource is used than solely looking at just the number of hours that people have spent on the PCs. And the new Wi-Fi as well has been really useful throughout COVID, because this has enabled people to use their own devices so that they can come in and sit down and use the Wi-Fi and spend a whole day within the library, which again isn't then captured within the visits to sites. So we've had people come in with their tutors for those that have been excluded from schools, and they have spent all day, every day for 2 solid weeks in the library using the Wi-Fi to get that individual to do their studying, which otherwise they wouldn't be able to do for their exams that have just been and gone. So we're really looking at the Wi-Fi usage again in terms of hours, but in terms of sessions. And this is something we've not been able to previously capture before. So it's something that we are really closely monitoring and will again be able to bring back with additional information for you. Linked to that, it's not just the students, but we've also seen an increase in small businesses that have started to work from home as a result of the COVID pandemic, who are attending sites again to be able to utilise both the printing and the free Wi-Fi that's available. And building on that, in this year of Year 7 of the contract, we were successful with the Libraries Improvement Fund bid, and it does mean that we can further enhance the IT provision specifically for small businesses to be able to help them and provide them with a meeting space for their clients that they've no longer got since they've started to work from home rather than being in a building. And then I suggest that the last real point within the report to highlight is again just the continuing service that our community hubs bring to the library service as a whole. And obviously throughout Year 6, as mentioned, they were still recovering from COVID, but GLL gave so much support to each and every one of those hubs to ensure that they could come back online and could serve their communities. And it is an area that we do strongly support across the whole region because we realise how fundamental the sites are, but equally how vital those volunteers are and their hours that they provide to ensure that we've got that service across all of Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you, Louise. I'll now open up for any questions. Councillor, sorry. I'll take
Comments in the...
Corey
Oh, sorry.
Okay, Councillor Corey, followed by Councillor...
Just a comment. Thank you, Chairman. Okay. If anyone had any doubts about the passion, enthusiasm, care with which our colleagues in the library service did deliver those library services, I think this paper and Louise's presentation should erase any of those doubts. So I want to record my heartfelt thanks. I've only been your portfolio holder for just over a year, and a couple of years before that I was your executive support member. So I marvel at just how much work and attention you put into the library service, and I know a library service is had to undergo dramatic and sometimes traumatic change a number of years ago, but I think you've done exceptionally well with our partners in Greenwich Leisure in making sure that we've got those hubs in as many places as possible, working with our communities, working with the parishes, working with our volunteers, and I just want to say thank you. You do a fantastic job. Ermine, yes, I'm going to say it, it was one of those situations where you worked incredibly hard, and but circumstances beyond your control meant that it's only today could we get the Ermine Community Hub open. We wanted to do it sooner. You worked incredibly hard to try and get it open sooner, and we want to make sure that all those benefits that all our communities across this huge county, they'll also enjoy them in Ermine from today onwards. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Lee, followed by Councillor Stokes.
Thanks, Chair. I've got some positive comments. First of all, just around some of the things that the hubs are going to deliver. People will remember from the last meeting we had an item on Multiply. I think it was Multiply, wasn't it? The adult programme for literacy and numeracy. That they're hoping to deliver some of that from the library hub, as well as there's somebody, Legat, they're going to do training from there as well. In terms of IT provision, I went in on the 5th, and they've only actually got 2 PCs. I've encouraged them strongly to ask for more funding because I'm worried, because nowadays apparently when you go on universal credit, if you've got any problems with it, there's no people anymore to deal with that. You've actually got to go on a computer, and by definition people who are on universal credit might actually not have internet access. So I think that's something that we really need, more IT provision at the Ermine Library Hub. And just to correct the report, it says that the hub reopened on the 19th. It didn't. We got it at the beginning of the month. We got the keys on the 5th. It actually reopened on the 19th, and I'd like the report correcting, please, because that's not accurate. It's going to be open 1.5 days a week, a Tuesday and a half day and a Wednesday, and I really look forward to that being increased. We've got other, I've asked for other things. We're hoping to have winter warm rooms there. When people, in the winter, when people can't afford fuel, hopefully they might go to the library and do a bit of reading and keep warm at the same time. And when I was there, I actually nipped to my car and a lady stopped me in the street and said, "Oh, is it opening? Is it opening?" And I said, "It is." And she said, "Oh, we used to have knit and natter in there." And I actually manoeuvred her into the building, and I think they're having that in there now as well. So it's amazing how, you know, how quickly it will catch on. And just finally, I'd like to just reiterate my comments about service delivery. And I'd like it noted for the record, these were not aimed at officers. They were aimed at the fact that despite sitting on large reserves, we don't have enough officers to have delivered this in a timely manner. It was not aimed at officers, and I don't want anyone making my words seem to be something that they weren't. It was not a criticism of officers. It was about the funding and the resources of those departments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Stokes.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'll ask my annual, it seems to be annual question, because obviously Grantham hasn't transferred yet to GLL. How is that progressing at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And I will give my annual response that we are still working with our colleagues in property services to be able to find an alternative site and building to be able to relocate the library service. But fundamentally, we are just working within the limits that we've got within Grantham and ensuring that the site that we do locate the new site to be in is fundamentally fit for a library service. I think we have explored multiple options and we have been willing to reduce what our physical site would be within the Grantham area, but we just need to be careful to make sure that we don't accept something that's then going to reduce the offer and the service down to obviously our customers, because Grantham is on the whole the second highest performing site, and we do get high numbers of customers coming in for activities and events. So we are still working on it. We think there is a potential solution there. We are aware of the deadline. Staff are still being treated as a full service rather than being isolated, and they work with GLL and do their meetings as well. So the service isn't impacted on it, but we are still working to be able to confirm where a relocation would be.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mr Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just a comment, really, on page 143. I was really pleased to read about the craft packs being given to children. Hopefully you can get some more sponsorship from other places to increase that. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. As I say, it is something that GLL are now taking forwards as standard protocol, that these craft packs were initially created out of a requirement and a need because customers couldn't be physically in the site. But because the take-up was so great, that's just part of the standard offer now. Activities will be in the sites for those that want them, but takeaway packs will be available for individuals who, for whatever reason, can't be within the site. And I'd just like to echo Councillor Lee's comments around the knit and natters and the messy mornings, the rhyme times, all of those kind of activities we have as standard within all of the core sites that GLL are monitored and contracted to provide. But GLL also then provide that support to each and every one of the 34 community hubs so that they can replicate it. And what we do is replicate what's required for the needs and for those communities. So not everyone will have a messy morning if they haven't got the requirement for younger children to be doing that activity. But one of the other areas that we've really worked on within COVID, which has been phenomenally useful and beneficial for our users, is a tea and coffee morning. So just to be able to bring residents in to have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat, especially when a lot of their other services and needs to leave their buildings has reduced as a result of the pandemic. So we are slowly seeing more people come back in and trying to reach as many as we can.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I just wanted to comment on social value, and it was great to see that this is identified in the report. As we all know, libraries offer a huge social value to our communities, and social value exercise has been carried out by GLL, and as I say, it's great to see. I mean, the social value engine is very much accepted and used across many sectors now, and if we see the social values given on page 154, it's impressive. So I just wanted to add that and mention that the social value is so important, and libraries are really creating hugely to that across our county.
Okay, thank you. At the start of the report, I mentioned we've got Dana Edmonds online. If I can go over to Dana, is that possible? See if she's got any things she wishes to add.
Hello, thank you very much for having me online. I'm sorry, I had hoped to be there in person, but in view of the weather, I thought it was probably not appropriate. I think that the service has progressed so well this year, despite the difficulties, and perhaps partly because of the difficulties, because when you're in a difficult situation, you think of more innovative things to do. So I'm really delighted with progress. Our work really is to get previous customers back in, particularly to encourage older people who we know are now coming less regularly, but still regard the library as an important part of their life. So I think our job in the coming months is to attract people back into the service and really encourage them to make the most of the facilities within their community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can see no further speakers, so thank you, Louise and Diana, and thank you all for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I'm going to move that the committee receives the report and that we are satisfied with the performance detailed in the report. I also move that we support the development and future actions for year 7 of the contract and request that our comments, as captured, are taken into consideration in future design and delivery. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Okay. Abstain? One abstention. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 10, which is the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Work Programme. This item is on pages 157 to 164 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara. The actions are that this committee is invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So, over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to say that there hasn't been any changes to the work programme, so no additions or omissions, and working closely with officers in terms of adding items for the next council term. Thank you.
Any comments from members? Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I notice on page 159 we've got flooding incidents to be commented on. I'm wondering whether we should move that later in the programme, as we wouldn't have much flooding, I would have thought, during the summer months. Maybe it should cover the period November 21 to March 23 and have it in the March period. That's a comment.
Okay. Should we liaise with Fire Officer about that?
Thank you. Of course, just to confirm, this has been now made a single standalone item because we did not have the performance indicators reported on in a time, well, we couldn't get the figures so as for it to be part of the report that we've received today. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, which is why we've moved it to a later date.
Yeah, we're also well aware that there's other elements of the county council that have other jurisdiction over flooding, so we want to make sure that it's an amalgamated report that doesn't just cover response from a fire perspective.
So we'll take that under consideration. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Mrs. Clark.
Yeah, just a brief question. I asked some time ago about community trigger process, and I think it's kind of fallen off the work programme, or maybe it's got involved in something else, or it's encompassed in something else. Just need to ask about that, really. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed for this question. Yes, it will be covered under our antisocial behaviour item that will be coming through in the next few months. Thank you.
Okay. No further questions. So I'm going to move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 157 to 164, and any additional items which was mentioned in the discussion will be added. Can I ask you if you raise your hand if you agree? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. We now sit as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee. For the next and final item on today's agenda, we'll be discharging our Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee function in line with Section 19 of the Police and Criminal Justice Act 2006. This item is on pages 165 to 204 of the agenda pack. Consideration of this item is part of pre-decision scrutiny, and I'd like to remind you that the views of this committee will be reported to the Executive ahead of consideration of this item on 6th of September 2022. The report and presentation will be delivered by Carl Miller and Rachel West, who are both with us here in the chamber. Our actions are, we're invited to consider and comment on the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive as set out in the report on page 168, and also agree to pass our views to the Executive. So without further ado, over to you, Carl and Rachel.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, Scrutiny Committee. So we're here this afternoon to talk through the report that you'll have found in your pack to give you a basic key overview of the main points in the report of note. So the recommendation that we're seeking your views on is the recommissioning of a single county-wide domestic abuse support service to start 1st of April 2023. And this amalgamates the current provision that we have in the county and has fed up from the review work that you'll see noted in the report in terms of key recommendations for the changes that may be required to support victims into the future. The key rationale for this service and the recommendations in the report are that the Domestic Abuse Support Service supports some key priorities, notably those in the corporate plan, the Safer Communities Partnership, the Domestic Abuse Partnership, and also is aligned to support some of the future guidance that is emerging at the moment. This is a really a fluid moving policy and legislative programme around this particular issue. Currently issues such as the Serious Violence Duty, the Victims Bill, and violence against women and girls policy is all in throes at the moment, and that guidance is certainly being considered in the design of this service and will likely impact on the delivery of this service during the future contract term. So the design of this service really is helping to prepare us for that future legislative programme and what that might mean for the service, and developing a service that actually can flex and respond to those likely changes. The co-commissioning of this service is a key change. We've got funding not just from the local authority but also from the Office for the Police and Crime Commissioner, and health colleagues have now funded into this project, which is really in line with the legislative ethos and movements and guidance that these sorts of issues are dealt with on a system level and are supported and collaboratively in that approach. And I think the funding for this service is a really big start and a step forward for that. The service review that you'll note in the paper looked at some really key strengths that are currently being delivered by the current services, but also identified some key developments that we need to make, but also some future new areas to the model that really should benefit victims for the future in Lincolnshire. Quick overview for you of the current provision that we have. So we currently have two main contracts that we're looking to consider as part of this recommissioning. One of which is a community-based outreach service, which supports all victims who are deemed to be in their risk status as standard or medium risk. So all victims who potentially approach the service for support are currently eligible for support through that service. There is also an independent domestic violence advisory service, which supports our highest risk victims at risk of serious harm or death. And those victims are supported also through our MARAC processes. That service supports those types of victims. Both of those contracts end at the end of March next year, and both of those contracts have reached their full extension opportunities. So we really, the desire to need to recommission, we don't have options to extend those contracts any further. The current challenges that we've found by going through the service review and by managing those existing contracts, I say the key issue that we've faced is demand management. You'll note from the paper there's been a significant increase in demand specifically for the outreach service in 2021. We've noted that a significant reason for that is policy changes in some of our referral partners, notably through Lincolnshire Police, has seen an increase in referrals through that particular partner. However, that isn't to say that there wouldn't be other increases through other partners in the future. We've noted that actually health referrals are really not where we would anticipate they should be, so there is the future for other demand increases to be seen during this contract term in the future. The other significant challenge we've faced is the way that demand management is set out in the current contracts. It's based on a waiting list system, so if the demand is reached the current capacity, we then have to operate a waiting list system to support victims. I would add, to give reassurance to the committee, that that is done in a very stringent risk-based approach. So all victims currently, their referrals are visually screened within 24 hours of getting into the service, and then their access to service is then determined by that risk status. However, we want to look at how we could improve that in the future so that we can get timely support to victims and respond more effectively to those demand fluctuations that may well come. As part of the review work, we looked at future scope. We did quite a lot of demand analysis. We looked at a lot of police data, health data, current data from the services to really try and give us the best idea we could in terms of demand projections. I would stress this is a really difficult agenda to actually predict demand. It's very sensitive to external parties. It can also be very sensitive to external fluctuations. So we needed to make sure we designed a service that could manage those demand fluctuations in the way that we designed it and in the way that it has the potential to flex during the next contract term. We also looked at existing support services, and some of the key recommendations and outcomes that came from that is our IDVA service, our children's element of our outreach service, and our outreach service are delivering good outcomes for victims. However, our outreach service has been significantly hampered in terms of the pressure on that service due to the demand that it's seen over the last year, 18 months. The other key elements that we looked at was a cost review and budgeting. We identified that the current demand in terms of the way the budget is profiled is 96% of the cost of the current services are spent on staffing. There has also needed to be significant investment in this service in the last 18 months to really support that additional capacity, and that investment has come from the council but has also come from the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner. There's also been a lot of additional monies that have come into these contracts during this current term. Short-term funding of DA through bids and grants has been a consistent challenge through this current contract for the service. As you can imagine, we can only employ people on short-term contracts to meet that particular funding, but also it doesn't really forebode us able to plan on a longer-term basis for the future needs of victims. We've also obviously looked at the legal requirements, as I've touched on already, and the likely legislation that either is currently in train or potentially may come during this contract term to make sure that we can make due effect of that and take account of it. The other recommendations that came through was really a need to look at proactive outreach. So whilst our current service is called the outreach service, it really is an internal model where referrals come into the service from various partners and self-referral processes. What we really wanted to build into a new model was proactive outreach, where we actually have workers going out to target those underrepresented communities or victim profiles that we know wouldn't necessarily approach a support service. We need to go to them. So the need for that proactive outreach was a key recommendation that came through from the review. We also know there needs to be much better intelligence and data intelligence around this service to really drive commissioning and attend to that detailed analysis that we would need to do in terms of supporting the service. A key example of that, for example, is as when this contract was set up, we looked at how many referrals, so I can give you lots of data in terms of how many referrals came through, but at that point we weren't looking at the victim profile in terms of the status of their risk at that stage, which obviously is something we have captured over the last 18 months, but that will be a key feature going forward, so we know what our current victim profile is that's going through services. In terms of the key changes then that have been proposed for this service, one of them obviously is the fact that it's going to be joint funded, which I think is really welcomed, and a lot of work has gone in to achieve that with partners. The single service model, we're recommending rather than having two contracts, we actually amalgamate the IDVA and the outreach element into one contract. The key reasons for that is at the moment we benefit from it being the same provider for both contracts, and actually the risk of having different providers would be actually there may be some disjointedness in the way that those two key elements interface and work collectively. Obviously, there's some efficiency gains appropriate that may be available to be realised by having one provider over two services, but it also benefits victims. At the moment, IDVA, an IDVA worker supports a high-risk victim, but actually if that individual then, their risk status changes, they would then need to go down to a different worker, maybe in the outreach team, or an IDVA worker could identify somebody in the hospital who may actually be a medium-risk worker, a medium-risk victim, but at the moment they would be needed to be supported by a different element of the service. So it would be much more flexible for victims and allow that joint working across the IDVA and outreach staffing. The other key things that we've put for key changes is eligibility. At the moment, this service is very broad in terms of eligibility. If you've been a victim of DA, you are accessing specialist interventions at the moment. And whilst we want to maintain this service, make sure that any victim can access support through this service, we strongly have found that actually the specialist intervention, one-to-one support with workers, needs to be targeted at those highest risk victims in our county. However, to do that, we need to maintain that that universal offer that is there for all victims is bolstered, improved, and really feeds through the research that we've found. So that not only means that there needs to be access to support for victims to be able to access online resources, information, chat functions, be able to access that, but also their family, friends and colleagues. We know from research that people are more likely to disclose to friends, family and colleagues than some of our professional pathways. So we need to make sure there are resources for friends and family to know what to do if somebody in your family is experiencing domestic abuse, and have specific resources available for those individuals too. We also looked at some new elements you'll see in the model. So really working on most recent research, but also what we know is working well in other areas, is to put in an outreach and engagement team, and that really feeds off the information around proactive outreach into communities, developing peer support networks in communities to be able to support those people that currently maybe not accessing services who should. But also a new recovery element. And this is really feeding off other areas where this is working extremely well to prevent re-victimisation. For those DA victims that really need that additional bit of support, whether they're going through a civil injunction case or having more complex needs, to give them that longer element of support to really progress them on their recovery, to hopefully reduce the amount of repeat victims that we're having and re-referrals into the service. The other key change is Lincolnshire Police are supporting with referrals that go through their service. So coming into the support service, the OEPC are helping with a triage and referral process, so that all those victims that come through Lincolnshire Police will also have an additional triage before they enter the specialist support service to be able to access those interventions at an earlier stage. And then finally, the other key difference you'll find in the paper is there's been a tripartite agreement between police, health and the local authority to support any additional demand that there may be through this contract should we go over the expected capacity, to really make sure that we can bolster that capacity should we need to. So as you'll see in the paper, there's a model diagram on there. I've gone through most of those points with you in terms of the universal offer and bolstering that, the support hub where people will come in, access a helpline, but also do the triage and a strength-based assessment. The interventions that are currently working well for adults and children will remain, but again, the access to those will be targeted at those highest risk victims. The IDVA service will remain, and we will use and really bolster the information that we've learned from the current services, specifically around dedicated roles, for example, criminal justice IDVAs that are specifically working in those areas. And then the recovery and the outreach service, those new additional elements that we do feel will really make a difference to victims. In terms of the budget, it is an increased budget. There has been, like I said, a lot of additional capacity needed to go in terms of finances to really bolster the capacity during this service. And we really wanted a sustained model that we could really build for the future on. So there has been a much increased budget in the paper that you'll see. It is 1.65 million per annum. And that's a secured budget across the partners, as you'll see set out. However, as I've said, the likelihood of short-term funding is still present. The likelihood of there being potentially additional funding that may come through legislative changes, and all that is factored into how we would approach that in the new service contract. hand over to my colleague to look at the next section.
Thank you. So just to summarise the commercial approach for the new service, which takes account of the findings of the review work undertaken, as well as the identified service model improvements that Rachel's just discussed. The scope for the new service will be a single county-wide service, including the previously separately commissioned IDVA and outreach services, as Rachel has mentioned, that being intended to maximise the efficiencies and, importantly, the flexibility in service delivery moving forward. The contract duration will be a maximum period of 5 years, with an initial term of 3 years and options to extend by up to a further 2 years. And the market engagement that we undertook as part of the pre-procurement and commissioning preparation was supportive of that approach as viable and attractive to the market. Payment for the core service will be by way of a fixed sum or block payment. Bidders will be permitted to submit tender costs up to but not exceeding the fixed sum confirmed by the council prior to publication of the tender, and that's the 1.655 budget that's referred to in the report. Included as part of bidders' pricing submissions, they will be required to submit details of the service volumes and outcomes that they propose are achievable within their respective delivery solutions. Unit prices for specific service elements will also be generated via bidders' financial submissions, and those will be the basis for the additional payment mechanism should demand exceed the service delivery volumes established during the tender process as part of the core service. Again, as Rachel has described, an agreement's been reached with the OPCC and CCG representatives that any additional payments applied through this mechanism would be subject to approval within the context of the tripartite agreement, with any additional financial contributions informed by the source of the demand. The contract will include an open book accounting approach as the basis for assessing whether the service provider has generated any excess profit, and that open book approach will enable then any efficiency savings that the provider realises through the delivery of the service to be apportioned via a gain share mechanism should the actual costs of delivery be below the tendered service delivery cost. In terms of performance monitoring, that will be driven by user outcome measures based on industry standard measures, as well as a focus on the timeliness of service interventions to support risk mitigation for individuals benefiting from the service. We'll also incorporate service credits, which are a performance incentivisation mechanism linked to the payment for the service. Those will be targeted at a limited number of key performance indicators that focus on those measures that are most representative of a high-performing service and focus on service user experiences in the service and the achievement of outcomes for those individuals. Okay, thank you, Chairman. That concludes the summary of the report.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder, this is a pre-decision scrutiny item, and I welcome any comments. First one from Councillor Braywharton.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. I've had the fortunate experience of working at Luton Domestic Violence Unit back in the 1980s, and I'm really pleased to support these proposals here. What I like is the words supportive, proactive outreach, and you can see on page 170 there that there are thousands of victims who are vulnerable to domestic violence. And you'll see in there that 900, sorry, my eyes not focusing properly, 930 are high risk. You're talking about 10 years ago, back in Luton, we had 610 then who were high risk category cases who we couldn't deal with because there were so many to deal with. But it needs targeted support, and therefore I would support this totally, Chairman.
Thank you. Any further comments? That's a sign of a good report, isn't it? You know, nobody wishing to comment, I can't force you to speak. So, well, I move that the committee approves the report and recommendations to the executive, and these are set out on page 168 of the report. And I request that the raised comment is also added to that, yeah? Do I have a seconder, please? I'm proposing to have a second. Councillor Wharton is seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against, there can't be any against. You're against your... So, unanimous, all in favour. Thank you. Okay. I make it that's the end of the meeting, and with an outside temperature now of 37 degrees, that now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance. You may now leave the council chamber. And thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Carl. Thank you.